it was magical. If you have received something of value from me, the best way you can repay me is to pass it on. I do not treat symptoms. I care for people. One of the obvious things about artificial intelligence is there's no.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this masterclass. Today, we have one very, very special guest. And I know that he doesn't need any introduction because you must know him. But anyway, if you had to introduce yourself, Robert, what would you say? I'm a trainer. I'm a co-creator. I am a developer. What would you say about yourself? Tell me.
Well, probably all of those things because I do a lot of training. I've done a lot of development in various areas. I'm also, of course, a consultant, a coach, and an author of more than 30 books. So yeah, and obviously my background is in the field of neuro-linguistic programming, but also this range of things that I have written relates to topics such as leadership, collective intelligence, entrepreneurship, also, working with beliefs. I think, and yeah, health is another key part of what I've done. So I guess a developer in a lot of areas, somebody who is interested in helping to bring a positive change to people in the world.
Yes, I like that your mission is to create a world to which people want to belong. So that I think kind of resumes what you are all about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. And the first question that we have for you, because of course our listeners and viewers are very much interested in the field of NLP.
Yes.
But
And we are
before
also
that,
because perhaps you can
yes.
just say also that yeah we're both Natalie and I master trainers of NLP. We've also been trained by you as mindset maps
That's right.
coaches and advanced mindset maps also with Slate of Mouth also
Yes. Yes.
level 1 and level 2.
Very recently with
So exactly.
yeah.
So it's really a privilege for us to spend this moment with you. So, Natalie, the first question.
Yes, the first question is regarding to NLP. How did you get in touch with NLP? How was that?
Well, so that's an interesting story. So I was a student at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and it's an interesting thing. I went to an all boys college preparatory high school, and I wanted to get this was in the early 1970s, and I wanted to get as far away from that as I could. And so UC Santa Cruz at that time there was no grades. Everything was co-ed. At that time was co-ed bathrooms and dorms, and that was big, big in the early 70s. Anyway, it was very progressive. And I was started as an art major, and because I was kind of thought I was done with all the science and everything. And then my second year, I kind of started missing, maybe I was missing my left brain or something. So I switched from art to physics. So I was a physics major,
Oh,
physics and calculus. And then my third year was like, okay, well, I got the thing I'm missing too much about people. So I actually became a politics major. And as part of politics, I thought, well, I should learn something about language. Also, my older brother was studying linguistics at Harvard University at that time. And he said, oh, you should look into this. It's a big, really interesting developing field. So I said, okay. And I decided to go to this beginning linguistics class, Linguistics 20, Introduction to Linguistics. And the teacher of that class was none other than John Grinder. And I had never seen a professor like him before. So John Grinder was quite a, he was a very athletic person. He was very, I mean, in those days, it was not unusual to have sort of revolutionary professors. But uh, anyway, he I think it was the second day of class, he was talking about this new thing that he was developing with this very mysterious character named Richard Bandler. And it didn't have a name yet, but they were just working on this book called The Structure of Magic. And so John essentially taught us most of these patterns, the so-called meta model patterns, where you listen for a certain language pattern and you ask a question. And it was kind of the first useful thing I'd ever learned in school. And when everybody, all of us, I think it was 200 people in this class, everybody's going out and asking all these questions. And I remember sort of it was like a Tuesday, Thursday class. So, but I remember that when people came back to the next class, a lot of them were kind of fairly dejected, felt down because they'd gone and insulted people, going,
They
well,
became meta monsters.
right, meta monsters. Can you put that in a wheelbarrow? But fortunately, I had a kind of natural capacity for rapport. But they, of course, then they developed the whole idea of rapport very quickly after that. And also they kind of later in that same year is when they first went to see Milton Erickson.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember them coming back, or John coming back, in particular for the class, and more or less saying, everything we said is wrong. It's actually the opposite, because the Milton model is the opposite of the meta model. And then, anyway, they went on to develop many other things. But I got involved by attending this class, and then the thing I did, because I was studying politics, I took the meta model and I applied it to Plato's dialogues, the Socratic dialogues in the Republic, which is a book about, early political ideas. And I was showing how Socrates would use the meta model, get people to sort of violate the meta model and then, ask by asking these questions, kind of get them to have these other perspectives. And John Grinder thought that was very interesting because they had only at that point they were studying therapists. They hadn't applied it yet to anything beyond psychotherapy. And so John found that very interesting. He started inviting me up to the groups that they were doing, these little groups these meta groups, they called them. And he also kind of gave me this assignment, which was interesting. He wanted me to, because I'd done this with Plato's dialogues. Well, Gregory Bateson, who was another professor there, and of course an important early influence on NLP, had this in one of his books. He had these so-called metalogs with his daughter. I think it was with his daughter Mary Catherine Bateson. And so John wanted me to say, okay, do the same thing that you did with the Plato dialogues with Bateson. And that actually got me very interested in Gregory Bateson's work. And anyway, so which then that led ultimately to sort of the development of the pyramid of the levels and all of these things. So anyway, it was a very exciting, very interesting time. And then I ended up, I mean, just by the way, so I ended up I switched at that time in UC Santa Cruz. You could actually create your own major. I mean, it was really hard. Yeah, it was hard work. You had to design it and map it all out, and present it, and do all this. So I actually made my own major because obviously there was no major in neuro-linguistic programming, and I wasn't a psychology major. So I actually created my own major in behavioral technology, it was called. And actually NLP Volume 1 was my senior thesis. So that was what I submitted for my senior thesis to get my degree.
Wow.
So that's how kind of I got started, and then became involved with the first groups with Leslie Cameron Bandler, LeBeau, with Judith Delosier, and with David Gordon and people like that. And we were creating these first NLP practitioner and master practitioner programs. So kind of all developed from there. And then we started teaching all over the place, and it took off, it exploded. So that's
Super.
kind of a long answer to your question, but that's a bit of the history.
That's
We're going
wonderful.
to,
Thank
to
you.
to jump on the NLP timeline, and now since we're in the beginning, let's go back to the present. So today, what is the contribution you feel most proud of in the field of NLP?
Wow, gosh. No, I mean, I was early on, I was very interested because, if you think of NLP Volume 1 is all about cognitive strategies. And so I did a lot of work with strategies, the strategies of genius and things like the Disney strategy, which I think is used very, by all over the world by not only individuals, many companies and organizations. But then, I got very engaged, especially because of you were talking about your mom's health issues, Michelle. My mom had major advanced breast cancer and used NLP to help her have a remarkable recovery. She was supposed to only live a few months and lived almost 20 years. So I thought, wow, that's interesting. And that was about working with beliefs. So not so much cognitive strategies, but the deeper issues of beliefs. And I've obviously written and worked with and contributed a lot to the whole notion of working with beliefs. And that's where this idea of sleight of mouth, this conversational belief change is coming from. And then also this notion of I think the pyramid of the different levels. So I would say, probably the things that I'm I'm still very much engaged in, and still even in the process of developing, are these things like working with beliefs, the language of beliefs, the strategies of genius. There's still many more strategies to be mapped out, and then also kind of working with, and that the levels pyramid is sort of the basis for all of the success factor modeling work, which is looking at not just individual performance, but teams and organizations. And I think I probably did a lot to bring NLP into organizational work, because again, a lot of people, even today, they still think that NLP is it's a therapy, and it's not a therapy. As both Richard and John said from the very beginning, NLP is essentially a process of modeling. It's an attitude and a process. It's not, as Richard likes to say, it's not the trail of techniques that's been left behind. And you can take that approach, that attitude, and that process, especially of modeling, into anywhere, and make a huge difference. So yeah, so I think some of those would be some of the things that I'm really happy about, and I'm only proud of them because I think if people use them and find that it makes a difference in their lives, then that's what it's for. You know, that would be the only reason to be proud, is that, hey, I can see that this has actually made a positive difference in the lives of a lot of people. So,
Yes, absolutely, and it has made a huge difference. And um, if we chunk down to
yeah,
this pyramid, because I think that the pyramid is kind of the matrix that holds a lot of techniques, of things that you have developed, that others have developed. And
right.
I am very curious to know, how did you come up with the
Yeah.
pyramid? How was your discovery, or how was it? How did you came
Well,
up with that?
yeah, that's another interesting story, of course, because as I said, that kind of has its seeds in the work of Gregory Bateson. So Gregory Bateson was also teaching at the University of California at Santa Cruz at that time. And he, Gregory Bateson is the one who also connected Bandler and Grinder to Milton Erickson.
Yes.
They would have never done that if it wasn't for Bateson, because Bateson had met Erickson back in like the 1930s when he was studying trance dancing in Bali. And through a mutual friend, Aldous Huxley, who was a famous person, uh, Huxley knew the Bateson family, and he also knew Erickson. And so he connected uh, Bateson with Erickson. And Bateson was trying to figure out what Erickson was doing.
Uh-huh.
And he had some ideas, but when he saw the structure of magic, he thought, these guys are onto something. And so he sent Bandler and Grinder down to see Erickson. And then I was taking these classes from Gregory. And Gregory's, one of his, I think, major contributions was this notion of different levels of learning. And he had a level, there's zero learning, right? Zero learning is you just keep doing the same thing over and over. And does it, just kind of like a robot. There's actually no learning. Learning one is, okay, I'm going to kind of make a change in my behavior based upon feedback. But learning two would be, I'm going to actually not just make a change in the behavior, but a change in the whole class of behavior. Instead of going from, a defensive behavior, I'm going to actually go towards, positive behaviors or whatever. And then he said there's learning three, which is about not even just the class of behavior, but a whole system of behavior, which would be like a cat has a whole system of behaviors, a dog. So these kind of as this big chunks. And then he said there was learning four, which was the development of completely new systems of behavior that had never existed before. And I thought, wow, those are really great. And he had these different examples. But it was kind of, for a lot of people, it was abstract. And if you think 3, 2, 1, 0, 1, 5, 4, whatever. And I remember I think it was in probably 1986 or something, because I thought what he was saying was extremely significant, that you need to understand that if you're going to create change. Because he said, different kinds of issues were like a learning one issue. Pavlov was only studying learning one. And if you try to do learning one, if for somebody who has a belief, it doesn't work very well, because it's, you're just still staying in the same box, you're just trying to make something change, and you got to get out of that box. And so I think I was in Norway, and I was having a dinner with my sponsor there, and he'd also knew about Bateson and had read some things, and we were talking about how important this notion of different levels were. And I said to him, yeah, they're so important. Somebody should do something practical with those levels. And as soon as I said that, I thought, oh, I guess that's me. So I thought, okay, how do you do something practical with this? And so then I started kind of looking at, well, so what does this mean? How could you actually put this into language that would be much more intuitive? So if you think, well, what is learning one? Learning one is change in behavior to the environment, and now, okay, learning two is a change in how you are responding. And it just kind of came out, started working with these ideas of environment and behaviors, capabilities, beliefs. And Bateson was also very clear, given his understanding of this, that this kind of change was in essence, not only, but in essence, top down, meaning if I change my whole system of behavior, well, I'm going to change all of the other things, right? Because it's a whole different system. And that's why the sort of level pyramid is that way, that, if I shift my identity, if I shift identity, let's say a role identity from a doctor to an artist, well, I'm pretty much naturally going to have to change, well, what are my priorities? What are the values? What kind of capabilities I'm using, where I'm working, when I'm working. So those kind of shifts would be, sort of obvious. And the interesting thing is, Bateson was always looking at relationships. And so I was saying, okay, relationship between what, right? So behavior and environment is a relationship. Between capability and behavior is another relationship. Between beliefs and capabilities, etc. So, and then, but again, that still, though, still kind of makes it a little bit more concrete, instead of 0, 1, 3, it kind of starts to make it concrete. But then, neuro-linguistic programming, to make it neuro-linguistic, then you've got to say, all right, if you're working on different levels, there should be obvious linguistic distinction, and that's where kind of beginning to think of things like just even the questions, where, when, what, how, why, who, for whom. Those start to go, oh, wow, there's a linguistic thing. And then you can start to realize that there are certain qualities of language, that, if somebody's just describing a red carpet, well, okay, there's no belief in that. There's nothing about identity. So you start getting that sense that there's identity level language, I am versus I did, and then the idea of and it's why sometimes we call them neurological levels, is saying, oh, well, actually, if you look at these different levels, how do we relate to the environment? Oh, through our senses. Oh, that's good. Okay, but action is more than just our senses. It has to do with the cerebellum and these different things that determine your physical action. oh, capabilities are going to be more cortical, right? I'm making these maps, and then beliefs are going to go, actually, the idea is they're going to include all of these things, but then go deeper. Now, that's the whole idea. Each level includes the other level and then takes it further, right? So now I get to, with beliefs and values, you're getting to these, structures in the limbic system and these kind of things. And then, identity becomes very interesting because in the one hand, you could say it's sort of the kind of the whole on the whole thing. Um, there are certain structures in the brain, like the reticular system, that if that's damaged, you're basically not, you're inoperative completely. Um, and then, sort of, okay, then the connection, this idea of it going beyond the tip of that pyramid to collective intelligence, then this has to do with the interactions between different nervous systems. Anyway, so it's kind of this development and then coming up with processes that are grounded in that, like alignment, like the level alignment process, etc. And then, in my book, Coach to Awakener, I'm saying, all right, now if you look at like you were saying, Natalie, these groups of techniques, you
Yes.
can say, oh, some techniques are really directed just for just behavioral level change. Others are, working with sort of internal maps. Others are working not just with the internal map, but also the belief that's connected to that, etc. And so, and actually, kind of as a result of that, I also developed what I called the unified field theory for NLP, which is basically a three-dimensional space where you have a vertical dimension of levels, you have a horizontal dimension of time, right? So different time, past, present, future environment, past, present, future behavior, etc. And then you have on the cross section, you've got the perceptual positions. My perspective and my timeline, your perspective is observer perspective. And so within that, you could pretty much map out if you follow the steps of any particular NLP technique, you kind of have this building, right? This space, you could say it's like an apartment building, and some of them are taking you up to the penthouse, some of them are taking you over to this wing, and some, kind of take you through a particular path there, whose purpose then is to, create a certain pathway of change. And so that is also something I use sometimes to say, let's look what, it's actually once you get the space, it's like you have have 3 times 9. So you have basically 6 times 9 boxes, and you go, a lot of these NLP techniques, you can say they spend a lot of time in certain ones of these boxes. Others, if you look at other things, they're going places that are not usually traveled to, like, well, what would a, second position on an identity level in the future or something? Second position on a belief level in the past, could be, what we use in re-imprinting or something. But you start realizing, oh, okay, there's these unexplored spaces. I wonder what that could be like. So it kind of also opens up new territories to think about in terms of modeling. Anyway, so that's kind of a history. Again, the key was getting this idea. It should be something that can be practical, and you got to make it neuro-linguistic. If it's neuro-linguistic programming, it's got to be neuro-linguistic. So what would be the linguistics of this? What's the neuro of this? And then that starts to really put it together, and then you can begin to create the techniques, the processes. So anyway,
Oh,
that's that's a
that's
long story.
amazing because it was so ahead of time with all the neuro parts.
Yes.
Of course, the linguistics also, but all the neuro parts today we see everywhere
Yes.
the neuroscience, and you
Neuroscience.
were up to that
Yeah.
so many years ago. Wow, this is amazing answer. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Just before you mentioned Milton Erickson as a very prominent figure in the creation of NLP, uh, how was it for you to meet Milton Erickson? How was the experience?
Oh, it was magical. I I was lucky because in those days Milton Erickson would basically only meet with people who had a PhD or more, and I was an undergraduate student. I didn't have any degree, but I was going to these groups that John and Richard were doing up in this little cabin in the mountains in Santa Cruz, where you'd have, I think back in those days, I think we were talking about, you'd have a dozen college students basically. And what, John and Richard would go down and see Erickson. And of course, the way you do modeling is important to understand, because they didn't do modeling by going and examining Erickson and analyzing his patterns. And John is very, very explicit about this. He said you don't learn a language by kind of, analyzing it. You can't describe a language unless you know how to speak it. So the first thing you got to do is know how to speak it. So they'd go down and watch Erickson do things, and then they'd come back and do it to us, you know. And when they could do it to us as these students, then they go, okay, I think we got the pattern. Because it's not an analytical thing in that sense, right? You do break it down, but the first thing you've got to do is be able to absorb it and do it. Once you can do it, then okay, here's the steps. So they were doing a lot with Erickson, and we were, they were, according to them, Milton Erickson was the most evolved communicator on the planet, and there was all these magical stories. And some videos that they'd had. Uh, I remember watching one of these videos with these students that, and all of a sudden, you're in the middle of one of these Erickson videos, and about 4 or 5 people are falling out of their chairs because they're going into trance and stuff. But they would do it, and they would do all these. It was just these really magical things up at this cabin. It's somebody might be age regressed to 2 years old, and somebody else, they had some problem with his legs, and so they disappeared his legs. They had a cue, and his legs would disappear, and then they were going to grow them back healthy. And so somebody be there, and they'd snap their finger, and suddenly this person's going, he's falling because his legs are gone. And there's all these things. I mean, you get a little bit of a sense. Terry McClendon wrote a book called The Wild Days that has some of those things in it. Anyway, I became very, how to say, I guess you could say entranced. No, I became very, really taken by the work that Erickson did. And I remember, because I remember I said I started off as an art major, and I still continue to draw. Like in my strategies of genius, I always like to draw portraits of persons, of somebody I'm interested in, because I learn a lot. It's a form, for me, it's a sort of a form of modeling. Somebody's face it's like a hologram, it's for the rest of the person. So I drew this picture of Erickson, and I gave it to John Grinder. And John Grinder immediately took it as an unconscious suggestion for me to go see Erickson. So he looked at this, he literally just kind of picked up the phone, called Erickson, and said, I want to send somebody, to see you. And of course, Richard and John, because they had a certain, at least at that time, they had a certain rapport with Erickson. There was a really high level of interest going on. They were sending some of the other undergrads like me and Stephen Gilligan and others who had, down, and Erickson would be, Erickson was, and his family, his wife, Betty, too, were extremely generous. So Erickson agreed to see me, and so I went down, and as a poor, starving student, I didn't have much money. Erickson's, they let me stay in their guest house.
Wow.
And I was staying in their guest house with another young person I don't think he had his PhD yet, but a guy named Jeff Zeig, who's become the head of the whole Erickson Foundation. So we were just these 2 kids there in their guest room. And periodically Erickson would see clients, and the client, his office was right next to the guest area. So you could sort of you couldn't hear the contents, but through the wall you could hear different things going on, sometimes laughing and then crying. And it was just interesting to do that. And then Erickson would see, his, kind of like the students, which again were not usually kids. They were, older, very, well-known, or, psychologists and things. So we would sit in with these things. And I remember there was a couple times when it was just us. It was just me and Jeff Zeig. And then one time Betty had to leave. So, because his office was just across from his house. So we had to go and watch him in the house, and, just kind of hanging out with him. But so the thing is, so Michelle, when I first went down to see him, that's the very first time, um, John gave me the picture I had drawn of Erickson to give to Erickson as a gift, along with the manuscript for Patterns of Hypnotic Techniques of Erickson, Volume 2, right? They hadn't published it yet. They'd published Volume 1. And so I had this manuscript, and I had this picture. And I was I was giving the manuscript, to him, and I gave him the picture, and he kind of looked at the picture, and his wife Betty, would wheel him in the wheelchair into the office, and he looked at the picture, and he said, "Well, Betty, why don't you file this in the circular filing cabinet," which means the garbage can, right? The circular filing cabinet means the garbage can. And then he looked at me to see how I was going to respond, because I had drawn it and everything. And I just went, whatever, that you can do with it was yours. You do with it what you want. But I know that was part of his, that's his humor right away. He's gonna see who you are, right? That's like immediately. And then, and I know that she didn't put it in the circular filing cabinet, because I know they had this picture on their wall in a very prominent place later on. But I remember the end of that first day, he looked at me because I had brought him the manuscript, and he said, "And now do you know that I'm nothing like Grinder and Bandler, or Grinder and Bandler said I was?" And I said, "Well, of course, Dr. Erickson. That's why I came to see you. I thought you were like they said. I would need to be here." But we had a really nice rapport. But I remember, one other just kind of an anecdote I often like to share is, of course, I was very much interested, kind of in this NLP approach, and how do you, trying to chunk it down. How do you know what to do? And I would have this whole bunch of questions, So if a client has this kind of issue, is it better to do this or to do that? And invariably, his answer would be, "I don't know." Okay, you're writing. Okay, he doesn't know. All right, what about this? If is it this? Is it better to do that? "I don't know." And that was more or less his answer to everything of those kind of questions. But and I, so you come away with a notebook that you say, the guy doesn't know anything. But it's true in a way, and because what he would say, and he wasn't trying to be evasive, because he would always follow it by saying something like, "Look, with that specific individual, with whatever particular rapport we have, and what has happened before, I really don't know." He was basically saying, "I do not treat symptoms. I care for people, right? And every person is, as he used to say, as unique as their fingerprint, every single individual. So I don't know." Said, but he'd always add, "But I'm very curious to discover what is possible, now." And maybe 2 minutes later, what wasn't possible 2 minutes ago is suddenly now possible, because and that's the mindset of Erickson, it's this constant curiosity of an unfolding potential every moment. And then his words are not pre-planned. They're coming spontaneously out of this quality of rapport, and of course out of what he calls, the creative unconscious. It's not coming from a cognitive, conscious, intellectual plan. It's coming out of a very intimate interaction, and then this connection to a collected, not just in my own creative unconscious, but the creative unconscious that is actually being made possible by our interaction. So, for me, it was, I think I'm like a lot of people, it was, extremely formative in my whole path from there, and I think one of the things I take away most from Erickson, was, there's just this quality of generosity and things. And because I never paid him for any of this time there. They let me stay in their house. I never paid them any money. I get, and I remember saying, how can I ever repay you, for all this that I've received so much? And basically his answer was, if you have received something of value from me, the best way you can repay me is to pass it on. And so I thought, that's why I wanted to, just as much as possible, pass on just these, this incredible gifts and things that I've received. So again, I'm sorry, I'm giving long answers to your questions, but
But your answers are so fantastic. Thank you so much. And when you are saying pass it on, it's kind of the metaphor that you use, that you are a candle and
yes,
that you are passing on the light, and it doesn't use you
right.
more.
You lose nothing. Yeah, yeah.
And
So
it's absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that question, that
and we're
answer.
also so glad because you mentioned Jeffrey Zeig, and we also have a masterclass with Jeffrey Zeig. So for
fantastic.
those watching this masterclass, you can find one also with Jeffrey.
Great. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
And I'm curious because I have this mindset of being curious, thanks to
That's
you guys. And
just like
um,
Erickson, right? Curious.
yes, of course. And when 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 we talk about Milton Erickson, is like one side of a coin,
Yeah,
and on the other side, I would put Virginia Satir.
yeah,
And I'm very, very curious because you had the opportunity to also meet her.
yeah.
It was like this boiling.
Yes,
Uh, uh,
yes,
yes, I don't know. It was just these brains coming up in the
yes.
same time and moment. And I'm very curious because I I listened to this anecdote of you taking class with Virginia Satir and modeling her. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm coming to the source to ask for the real anecdote, that
Mm,
you had your Walkman, something like that,
yeah.
and
No, this is. I think that you're conflating me with Richard. I mean, so I did. So the story there, and you can check it with Richard, but this is the way what I heard all those years ago is that um, Richard had been hired to record this. So the background there is, Richard was, I think he was up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he got a job working in in this company that made books, science and behavior books. And so, okay, a little bit of backstory to this. So, this is back in the time, when psychotherapy and up until the early 70s, you had to have a white coat, and it was, basically, it was all about until the 60s, it was all about being essentially had to be a doctor and all these things. And it was Freudian therapy was about the only thing that existed, otherwise drugs. And in this, kind of the late 60s, people like Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir, they started creating these other modalities. The whole Palo Alto school, Gregory Bateson got involved in that. And there, Fritz Perls was a big factor. And there was a guy named John Stevens, who most people in NLP know as Steve Andreas. But in his first name was John Stevens, and his mother was Barry Stevens, would studied a lot with Fritz Perls. And John Stevens did this book that's totally interesting thing, never been done before. He took recordings of what Fritz Perls did when these Gestalt groups, which were just personal development groups, but it was kind of a mix of therapy, personal development, at Esalen, these places like that. And John Stevens wrote this book called Gestalt Therapy Verbatim, and it kind of was just this immensely popular book because you could actually, reading what's going on. It's not some hidden, it's like really demystifying, but it also is bringing it alive. So this guy that ran this science and behavior books wanted to do the same thing. And he started with these things of tapes of Fritz Perls, and Bandler was editing these tapes. So he was kind of absorbing all this stuff. And then the guy wanted to do the same thing. This publisher wanted to do the same thing with Virginia, like a Virginia Satir verbatim, which I don't think ever happened. But so they sent Richard Bandler to this place in Vancouver to where she was doing a workshop. And he wasn't actually supposed to be studying with her. He was supposed to just be recording it so they could come back and make one of these kind of books. And this is what according to Richard, Richard's stories can change, but this is what I remember. that he was kind of monitoring the class out of one ear and listening to Pink Floyd in the other. From, and I don't think there were even Walkmans then. I'm not sure what it, but it, kind of you just. But at the end, when Virginia was trying to having the people that were in the program, try to do what she had been doing. So you do it, and then your people are supposed to be coming up and showing what they learned. They hadn't learned very much, but Bandler could, he'd sort of absorbed it. And that's what we used to say. Richard was always like the sponge. Like Richard just absorbed it. And of course, one of the challenges with the sponge is that you get the dirt along with the water, but you get it all, and then you got to sort it out. John was more like a chameleon. John was the spy. He had his background. What part of his background was a CIA agent. And so that's where he learned all this kind of modeling and different languages. So he would turn the color of the background. So you have a chameleon and a sponge forms of modeling. That was that story. Now, I mean, my personal interactions with Virginia were much less. So, I mean, the basic thing I remember that Virginia telling me, my takeaway is she said, Robert, you're slow, but you're educable. And that has been, especially in the matters of relationships. So that's been very helpful in my relationship with my wife. It's like, I'm slow, but I'm educable. And to me, by the way, I think Virginia, I think is sometimes the unappreciated. I mean, I think she had contributed so much. The whole notion of positive intention is directly with Virginia. All the whole notion of parts, of perceptual positions. I think, I think that a lot of this whole work, the work about family fields and all these things, that's all coming straight out of Virginia. Family, all of the modern day constellation work is directly from what she did. None of it is particularly, innovatively different than what she was already doing. So, she had this extremely, I think, capacity for, systemic thinking. Bateson was a systemic thinker, but Virginia was a systemic, actor. She knew how to, get in there and feel it, what we would call fourth position. I'm in the system, not in third position looking at it, but I'm in it. So I don't know. I hope that maybe you have to check with Richard about that. But
oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful because these kind of stories they become kind of word of mouth, and it's not real. So thank you so much for clarifying that.
Well, I think that the essence of the story was really it just wasn't me. It was really.
Thank you.
At least as far as I know. Maybe Richard will say it was somebody else, but that's what I'm pretty sure that's the.
Yeah. Just before you were talking about modeling, it's something that I really love because I've been working quite extensively on that, on language learning, on translation, etc.
Yes.
And you were mentioning that for Richard Bandler and John Grinder, modeling was really something that is not analytical. It's really an experience you go into. Now I have a question, a tricky question.
Sure.
Because you have modeled many geniuses like Mozart, like Disney, and in some way it was in a big part very analytical. How do you place that in that realm of modeling?
Yeah.
And for instance, how come that was one question I had at the beginning. How come that today, after having those books, there are not so many Mozarts and Disneys all around the world with this kind of creativity?
Well, first of all, I'm not so sure that there isn't. I mean, so because the whole notion, Michel, you got to understand the whole notion of modeling Mozart had nothing to do with music, right? It's not about music. Modeling Disney doesn't have to do with, making animated films. So, now and I think that's a great question, right? So how do you model somebody that you don't see personally, right? You go, well, you just can't model them. It's only analytical bullshit. No. So the first thing you need is you got to realize it's not biography, right? So the whole reason I did my thing with Mozart was because he wrote one letter, a few paragraphs. And in that letter, he was describing this creative process. So now I can't, obviously, if I was going to try to model Mozart on on a behavior level, all you could model is him decomposing, not composing, right? So, so what you're doing is you're getting second position. And I'm going, so now, just like I said with everything else, once I can do it, right? So, I mean, first I do compose music. I mean, I do play on piano and guitar and stuff. So I compose music, but it's not really about the music. I would kind of use it that way, but the way, obviously the way I use Disney strategy has nothing to do primarily with making an animated film, although I also made animated films in my background. It was actually, I did that before I got involved in NLP, in fact. I became very fascinated with Disney because I saw how he totally revolutionized that field. And I thought, what did he do there? There's something that he did. Same thing with, this is the idea of genius, same thing with Mozart. Suddenly everything is different. But by doing animation, in those days, you didn't have computer animation. You basically would draw for every second. You have 32 different pictures. And now imagine you're looking at a butterfly flying or you're watching somebody's face. And for 1 second, I'm going to draw 32 different pictures. You really learn how to observe really well, right? So then like seeing eye movements is nothing, for some people they're going, oh, it's happening so fast. But if you've done any kind of animating, it's really easy. But coming back to your question though, so it's about second position, and to say, for me to say, okay, you can only model people who are alive. Everybody else is just, you forget it. You can't learn anything from them. I just don't think it's true. I know how to go to second position, so I can put myself into it, and then when I can do it, then I can say it's just like anything else. Then you can. So to be able to do it doesn't mean you have to have the live living person there, three-dimensional in front of you. Of course, I have lots of really interesting videos of Disney. You can find of him, as him when he's working in his dreaming room, etc. So and so now the goal is not to try to make another Disney, right? Your dreamer realist critic is going to manifest in a completely different way. And the whole thing with Mozart, it's about I mean, we use the whole strategy of Mozart is more or less the essence of all the generative coaching work that I do. I mean, it's very much alive in that thing. So I always thought that was kind of this little, I mean, I get it, but it seems to be a little bit, kind of taking that too far. So if you can get second position and you can produce something, now you're also not trying in any modeling, for heaven's sake, that used to be, remember, people used to say, oh, modeling Erickson means talk like that. That's bullshit. Erickson would go, stop it. That's not what I want you to learn from me. So, I mean, it was really weird to see somebody like, Leslie Cameron Bandler, who basically looks like, Marilyn Monroe, trying to be an old man in a wheelchair, rambling away. That's behavior modeling. That's not what you're looking at, right? That's imitation. There's nothing, creative about that. So modeling is not imitation, right? Modeling is trying to capture the essence, right? The deep structure of something. And in some ways, what I found in some of the modeling I do, that even certainly the behavior, certainly the environment is irrelevant. The behavior is actually irrelevant. Even the strategy is irrelevant. Maybe what most value is the belief. I mean, and Nathalie, as you know, that's what we're doing with sleight of mouth. When I'm modeling, somebody like, Gandhi, you're not really trying to do what Gandhi did. You're saying, okay, this guy was able to sort of shift belief systems and establish belief systems in some way. How did he do that? You can see movies of him, but actually what you need is something the material that you can get this kind of a deeper second position with. So, and you're looking for not the surface structure, but the deep structure that's generative, that somebody else could take on and then use in some way. So, when I model, as you know, Nathalie, when we're modeling Gandhi, or the other thing is, I've done modeling of people like Sherlock Holmes, right? There was never a real Sherlock Holmes, right? We're modeling, the speech from Mark Antony from Shakespeare. It's fiction, but even though the character is fictitious, the strategy isn't, right. The thing that they're doing is real, and that's what even makes it powerful. It resonates that, wow, this is something real. So Michel, I think that's the essence of it. I think sometimes, in fact, sometimes for people it might even be harder because when the real person is there, because you've got so much other noise going on. Whereas, sometimes you can just focus down on, okay, here's this bit that I'm really going to look at. And again, it's not like I'm sitting back and analyzing it. I'm getting that second position, and then I can actually describe what's going on. Of course, I got to be able to nail it back to something neuro-linguistic, and it's, so that's it's in a sense, I don't know if it's even analytical per se. It's more like chunking. I mean, so anyway, again, I'm giving you these really long answers to.
Thank you very much. I think it's very useful because for me, what comes to my mind is that nothing is good or bad. It just depends what you're looking for. And
Exactly.
in fact, it depends. Well, whatever you look for, you will find. So, uh,
Yeah.
whatever definition you give to modeling, you will find what you want to find. So that I think that's thank you very much, because I think that this is a question that comes quite often, at least in our
Yeah, Michelle,
trainings.
I think you're
And
saying something really important, that what all modeling is through some kind of filters. So, right, if you set your filters, that's all you're going to see, right? If you go, I'm going to model this particular thing, that's all you're ever going to find, because that's all you're looking for. There's that old saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I'm going to do much else. But this is why I think what I do think is that because I've written the whole book, Modeling with NLP. And the first stage of modeling is always what you call unconscious uptake. It is not analytical, right? The first stage has got to be this sort of unconscious absorbing it, getting into it. You don't know what it is yet. And then as you start being able to sort of bring it out in some kind of pattern, then you go, oh, here's the pattern. Now I get the pattern. And again, now that you were seeing it, doing that, we were taking these, looking at these Mark Antony things, but the pattern that I pulled out was not, just the, a list of what he did. You're trying to get, what is he doing here? What is the essence of it? And by the way, I think that's also the whole notion of the different levels of the pyramid. Each one is a deeper level to the others. Each level is content to the deeper level, and then that's the content to the deeper level. And so you're kind of always looking for this more generative, deeper structure. And the deeper it is, the more generative it's going to be. So
well, that's fantastic, and thank you so much for this longer answers. And I would want to extract as much as I can from you, but I am
we
conscious
can always
of
do
the
another.
time.
Do another
Yes, of
podcast.
course. So I would like to ask you
yeah,
one last
it could be
question.
useful because actually we didn't do even half of the
I know,
questions.
I know. I'm sorry. I do. I know. I'm really
Oh,
sorry.
that's great. But thank you
But there
for
will be a
for
last one
this
now. Yeah.
for this first one. And
Okay.
I'm very curious. How do you see the world with the future of the world with artificial intelligence, and what's the future of NLP in that frame?
Yeah. It's so interesting. In one of my, in the success factor modeling work, we work, a lot with this notion of vision in the future. And what I often like to show in those classes is I'll go back to like at the turn of the century, like at 1900, you have people looking at what is it going to be like in 2000. And it's nothing like it is in 2000. It essentially, all it is an extension of what they already know, right? So they really didn't see rocket ships, but they saw, uh, flying carriages. They didn't even see automobiles yet, or they had no sense of internet or anything. A few people like Tesla did. But for most of the time, when you try to envision the future, you're just kind of projecting what exists into some maybe more advanced form. But I think, if you think we think what the internet did from the 1990s till now, I mean, I think we don't really know what's going to happen with AI. That big leap that happened with ChatGPT-3 suddenly kind of really put AI in a whole other framework where we started realizing these things. For sure, there's no question that AI is going to be playing more and more of a role in every single thing that you do. I mean, everything that you do. Um, I mean, my experiences, in the things that I've used it for, I find it, both impressive and then also a little bit scary. I also find it lacking in a lot of things, meaning because I've actually, there's this whole thing, there's this group that wanted to create, robot Dilts, not Robert Dilts, but robot Dilts, which would be an AI thing. So, you feed in all the things and then you ask it what I would do, or what I would say. And, with all the things that it said, I agreed with. I thought, oh, that's good. But it's not actually working with somebody, right? It's advising, right? It's giving you some kind of structure. So one of the obvious things about artificial intelligence is there's no real emotional intelligence. And, so that I think is going to be very interesting kind of limit. Can you, I mean, maybe it's possible that you could in some way, I don't know how to say, substitute for it, but I think it's going to be pretty difficult. I think there's certain things that are going to be, challenging. But I'm like, for example, in mindset maps, we're creating a mindset maps AI coach. So, an AI, at least an AI advisor or mentor, so that you could go and you get your report and you can ask some questions there. But then if you really need coaching, you're not going to get your coaching from the AI thing. The AI thing is can't really coach you in the sense of the way that a person can. So I think you're going to be finding that more and more. It certainly makes things faster. You can do a lot of things. It's just like everything else today. Things you can do, going to do a lot of things more quickly. Um, I've thought about uh, having it take feeding it at a bunch of seminars, like maybe we're just doing, and have it write a book, and then I'll go through and edit the book, and it probably would do a pretty darn good job of capturing a lot of the stuff. So I mean, it'll make it faster. I don't think it's ever going to. Okay, I don't think, but who knows, that it will ever actually be generative in the way of it creating something like sleight of mouth or something, or it being able to, you know, mean, I don't think it can actually model without human help. I mean, they can do some kind of modeling, but I'm not sure it will be generative in the sense of actually creating something new. That's not really, it can synthesize data that's already there and find patterns, but to make something really new, who knows? Anyway,
Multiple intelligences.
yes, we
Yeah.
need multiple intelligences.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was time
I
passes
know.
so fast. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the clarity of everything you said, of the fun also you're making in your answers. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. And really all of you watching this video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll put all the links to find what Robert does under the video, so you will find everything there. And perhaps a final word, Robert?
Oh, well, just first, I just want to say thank you, because it's, you don't have fun alone. You have fun with you guys. I mean, really, like, really great questions. And also your attention and, thank you. I mean, I can really feel the interest and like you said, Natalie, the curiosity um, but yeah, I mean, I just think, yeah, and to me, NLP is still just beginning, and there's still so much to do, because, if you just take this idea of modeling there's a lot more to be modeled. And maybe, as I said, even AI is going to help you to model some of these more, maybe complex things and simplify it. But for me, when I still look at the future, there's a whole world of possibilities. We certainly have not solved probably some of the main issues. That's why we still have wars that have been, and that are historically continuing to go on in different parts of the world. There's a lot of problems to be solved, and there's a lot of new ones being generated by technologies like AI and smartphones and things. So they often say, the solution to one problem creates the next problem. So anyway, I guess my thing is for all these NLP people, go out and model. There's a lot to be done, and it's fun. I mean, it's makes a difference and it's fun. So
yeah. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much
much,
for
Robert.
your generosity and yeah, thank you, really.
So, all of you listening, thank you also for your attention, and
Hope you
we'll see each
enjoyed.
other. Yeah, and we'll see each other in the next masterclass. Bye.
bye.